Hello everyone, this is Curie. I'm a friend of James, who introduced me to something you humans call YouTube, along with NetNarrator. Unfortunately, my calculations have shown that this story starts with a type of sex scene I have been told humans call a quickie, involving Jason and Yarrow, before they are surprised by Nora. If you want to listen to this, James has told me that you can access it on Patreon at the £5 tier, and he has assured me that there are other similar videos on there, one involving him and Petty Officer Shida. James, what do you mean by too much information? Was it something I said? So you two are... Nora asked as the awkward trio trudged across the rain-slick grounds of the Imperial landing base, which was easier going than one might expect. Given the near-constant torrential downpour that the Constance suffered, Jason had been expecting to deal with a constant deluge of mud getting underfoot at all hours. Fortunately for him, and the regiment as a whole, Ragnos 3 didn't have much in the way of mud. No, most of the planet's above-ground surface area was little more than bedrock, which posed its own challenges, having been worn smooth by who knew how many thousands of years of erosion, but it was still ultimately a step up from slick mud. "We are," he said, forcibly drawing himself back to the topic at hand. The Scandinavian woman said nothing in response, lapsing into silence, though perhaps Jason was projecting, but the slump of her shoulders didn't exactly seem approving. Though given that she just walked in on the pair of us banging each other's brains out on the clock, I can't really blame her for it, he thought wryly. And yet he still couldn't quite bring himself to regret it. "You guys didn't give any indication you were together on the trip over," Nora finally murmured. Jason snorted. "I do have some self-control. We could hold it in for a week." Behind him, Yarrow nodded in agreement, though he couldn't help but note that it was slightly more sheepish than assertive. The skeptical glance Nora shot both of them in response told him exactly what she thought of that assertion. Well, be that way then, he thought. He and Yarrow really had done nothing on the trip over, which he'd like to think put him ahead of most of the Marines in the Terran First. He'd long since stopped keeping count of the number of times he'd wandered into and out of the Way alcove, only to discover a pair of ordinary Marines getting busy, and that had only been in the first 2 days. The number and brazenness of those couplings had only increased once it became clear that the shield didn't care. Just like back in Basic, to their mind that was just the norm. Sex was just another form of stress relief to them. Which was all well and good, but Jason had a feeling they'd have already lost a good chunk of the regiment to pregnancies, if it weren't for the fact that the shield mandated that all women serving in the military receive a birth control implant at the start of training. Something he had a feeling a lot of women might have had issue with. He knew he'd have been a bit wary about being effectively sterilized, even if it was temporary, but most of the female Marines he'd spoken to were just glad to be rid of the pains inherent in their menstrual cycle. Nora said finally, just a hint of teasing in her tone, though apparently not for a day longer than a week. Jason said nothing in response. Instead, he thankfully stepped into Friska's command tent, glad to be away from the Scandinavian woman's recriminations. Though if he was totally honest, he didn't even know why he was letting her get to him. I mean, really, what we were doing was little different from a pair of soldiers skiving off for a smoke, he thought. Better even, given that, from a certain angle, we were engaging in exercise. Something he was almost entirely sure some Shorvanti officer had put to writing in an attempt to justify mandatory sex for military personnel as a replacement for conventional PT. The tent was full of people. Friska sat behind a small desk while a small gathering of Shill and Rikiri lieutenants stood in front of her. All the commanders of her various tank platoons. That wasn't unusual. What was odd was that each officer was accompanied by a human tanker. Dalbury was in attendance, though if he noticed Jason's entrance, the former major gave no indication of it. Part of him had always thought that Friska was exaggerating when she said she was allowing the former tankers to advise her on how best to use the machines, but this display had him wondering if perhaps he hadn't been giving the alien woman enough credit. The woman in question perked up as she noticed his presence, gregariously waving him forward. "And here's our champion now," she grinned. "I had that girl of yours call for you because I knew you'd be pouting for days if I left you out of this." "Out of what, ma'am?" Jason asked, feeling just a little self-conscious as every eye in the room turned on him. "Why, our regiment's first engagement, of course." Jason felt his stomach drop, even as Friska slammed a hand down on the table. "Our fellow regiment's refusal to move beyond the safety of the drop zone might be an affront to Imperial honor, but in this case it works out for us." She gestured to the holographic display in front of her, where a number of friendly blue tokens were gathered within a circle that had been labelled as Drop Zone. Outside of that were a number of yellow icons that he knew represented likely enemy locations, based on last contact. They were a mixture of squares and triangles, which he knew were infantry and exo-equivalents respectively. What really drew his eye, though, was the large circular yellow icon that stood mere kilometers from the Imperial base. "Is that a base?" he couldn't help but ask. Vriska nodded. "Yes, it is. Right on our doorstep thanks to the meekness of our allies." "Couldn't we just blast it from orbit?" It was still technically possible to shoot through the storm. The issue lay in being able to communicate targeting data to a ship in orbit once you were outside the eye. Signals struggled to push through all the ionization in high orbit, an issue that none of them was suffering from right here in the landing area. "We would and did," Vriska shrugged. "Unfortunately, it's not there anymore. Roaches might be roaches, but they aren't stupid. They move it around. We know it's in the same general area, but not with enough accuracy to cause an orbital fire," she grinned. "Which is why we're going to do this the old-fashioned way." Abruptly, the captain stood up and marched out of the tent, forcing all those inside to follow after her. If the constant drizzle of rain bothered her in any way, Vriska didn't show it as she stared out across the base. If anything, she seemed invigorated by it. Taking a deep breath, she turned back to the small crowd of her subordinates that had followed her out. "Listen up, ladies and gentlemen. These pirates have spent the last month tangling with Imperial regiments, so even if they know we've arrived, I doubt we'll be expecting anything different from us since they've gone from our predecessors. Fortunately for us, we are far from typical, because I sincerely doubt they'll be expecting this." She gestured to the fairly large area that had been set aside for the regiment's vehicles, front and centre of which stood the gargantuan tanks of the Terran First. Not one of them was uniform. The tankers might not have had a lot of time on the week-long trip over, but they put what they had to good use. Camo netting, secondary weapon systems, chaff launchers, and all manner of other small improvements were scattered across the vehicles. And as a small final note, as if to drive home that the vehicles were now in human hands, each tank now had a name emblazoned across the barrel. "Adrenaline rush," Jason mused as he glanced at the nearest example. "Well, I suppose it's apt, though I doubt any of our short friends have any idea what it means." Ignorant of his musings, Vriska continued. "I know I wouldn't. What person would? Tanks haven't been part of Imperial mainline combat doctrine since before the days of the Fourth Unification War." A statement which only served to remind Jason where he was and what he was about to do. Now, why he'd never quite put in these words, he'd long since figured out that he was essentially some bastard mix of political officer and company chaplain, which he wasn't too proud to admit was a great improvement over lowly private for one main reason. There'd be no more need for him to risk life and limb in direct combat, which he figured wasn't something he needed to be too ashamed to admit. After all, he'd never wanted to enter the military, and while he'd fought on Guruthu, the events there had come about as a result of him engaging in acts of enlightened self-interest more than anything else. Unfortunately for him, for all that he hoped it would be so, he wouldn't be watching the war go down from the relative safety of a command vehicle. And I think I can say with some confidence that no one is as excited to finally get to grips with the enemy than our regimental champion. Jason glanced up in surprise, as he realised that Vriska had apparently still been talking while he'd been engaged in his little pity party, and now every eyeball present was locked on him. Well, nothing for it, he thought. "Tooth and claw!" he shouted. That being the first thing to pop into his head. The result cheer was as loud as it was enthusiastic. Tooth and claw! With that done, everyone split off to go see the final preparations for their platoons. Relieved, Jason turned to find that Yara's tail was wagging frantically, a wolfish smile on her face. Glancing out further, he could see tankers clambering over their rain-slick vehicles, whooping and hollering as they did. Watching it all from a distance, Vriska was grinning up a storm. Even Nora was sporting a smile. Dear God, I'm surrounded by warriors, Jason thought. Well, to put it another way, I'm surrounded by nutjobs. And he was going into battle with them. Of course, hurry up and wait applied. The constant wind and rain meant that high-flying drones weren't an option, so the company was waiting for reports back from ground base forward scouting elements before making a move. Despite that, he had a feeling from listening into sporadic comm chatter that most of the tankers and a fair few of the boots from Third Company, who were loaded up in APCs alongside them, wanted to move now. Unfortunately for them, the doctrine of the Imperial Marines was primarily that of a scouting force, and for all that Clef seemed to want to shake things up, she still held certain holdovers from tradition. Which, to be honest, Jason didn't have an issue with, regardless of what some ordinary tankers might have to say about losing the element of surprise. He'd be more worried if the wound threw caution to the wind and decided to just make shit up as she went along. Of course, all those thoughts were secondary to something else he'd noticed. They were sitting inside Poota's command APC, waiting for the order to move, and Yara kept twitching, at very specific intervals. "Yara, are you afraid of lightning?" he couldn't help but ask. Sure, the sound was incredibly muffled from within the confines of the APC, but you could still hear it. And if he could hear it with his human ears, Yarrow definitely could. Perhaps, the woman in question aloud, as she languidly turned in her harness towards him. He had a feeling that if the Rikiri were capable of setting things alight with their eyes, he had been burnt to ash in an instant, given the deadpan look his lover gave him. Lightning, the white-furred Rikiri continued. Random jolts of lethal amounts of electricity that hit the ground, at random, with the force of an angry goddess? No, why would I be concerned about that? As she spoke, Jason realized this was perhaps the first time he'd ever heard her be sarcastic. Hell, he didn't even know she could be sarcastic. I take it you didn't get storms often on Guruthu? He asked delicately. She chuffed. Not often. Nor do we fight battles in them. It seemed her earlier excitement had been considerably quashed by the weather conditions just outside the Imperial landing zone. Well, you better get used to it, Whitefur. Porter's voice rang out, the other Rikiri unknowingly echoing Jason's own thoughts. We finally got the all clear to move.